Faye, this is so scrumptious. Is this hand shucked?
Hi there, and welcome to Baseball by Design. I am SportsLogos.net minor league baseball correspondent Paul Caputo, broadcasting live, as always, from the Sunday Helmet Hall of Fame in my basement in Fort Collins, Colorado. Today, we're going to be talking about the High-A Cedar Rapids Kernels, who play in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Later on in this episode, I will be speaking with designer Dan Simon, who created the brand 17 years ago. I will be speaking with Heather Huckey, who is a conservationist with the Cerro Gordo County Conservation in Iowa. And Dan Simon will be back at the end of the episode with one of his Studio Simon Stumpers. Right now, I am so pleased to be speaking with Scott Wilson, who is the general manager for the Cedar Rapids Kernels in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Scott, how are you doing?
Excellent. Thanks for having me on.
It is cold out here right now, so it makes me happy to be talking about baseball. I have to tell you a story, though. This is sort of funny just to get started. I do a road trip with my friends called Baseball Palooza every summer, where we pick a different part of the country and we, see 4 minor league games in 4 days. And one year, one of our games was in Cedar Rapids. It's as close as we have ever come, knocking on wood here, to a rainout on Baseball Palooza. And it's middle of August. It is freezing cold, and the skies are just super ominous, super dark. The whole way we're driving there, we're driving through rain. I remember we stopped and played a very rainy game of miniature golf, and we get there and we're just thinking, please let there be baseball. I was just glad that the game wasn't canceled before we got there, right? Because it was, the weather was that bad. Went to the team store. We always hit the team store first, and I have a way too many minor league baseball T-shirts, and every time I go to a ballpark, I get another one. So this time, I'm thinking I didn't pack any warm clothing. So I go in there and I buy a sweatshirt with the amazing Cedar Rapids Kernels logo on it that I wore for about 2.5 innings because the skies cleared, sun comes out. All of a sudden, it's August in Iowa. It's muggy because it's been raining all day. And I now have this hoodie sweatshirt, and all of a sudden it's 90 degrees and muggy in Iowa. But that sweatshirt has become a prized possession because like I said, I have a million minor league baseball T-shirts. I have about 4 or 5 minor league baseball sweatshirts. So the Cedar Rapids Kernels get regular rotation in my clothing in the wintertime.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks for buying that. And what I say about the weather is welcome to Iowa. If you
Yeah.
wait 30 minutes, it'll change. I mean, we are familiar with that.
Well, that is all prelude to the fact that you guys have a really fun logo. You have a storied tradition of baseball in Cedar Rapids. You've been the Kernels since 1993, but the franchise itself goes back to the late 1800s. And you yourself have a certain amount of longevity with the team. You've been there almost a couple decades. So I'm curious what that feels like to a minor league team to have that level of responsibility to represent that place and to be a part of that community.
So that's been really the core of what we've been about the whole time. I guess I would say in my life before this, I spent 20 years in retail, and when I decided a couple of decades ago to get into something else that was more fun, I wanted something that was attached to the community, and minor league baseball is all about that. And you look at the Kernels, and you're talking about the logo, and we your email to me brought this up, and we talked about it as a staff. There's three of us who've been here the whole time for the last 20 years, and we're here when that logo came out. We look back and we're thinking, oh my gosh, we unveiled that logo in October of 2006. I mean, this current logo has been around for 17 years.
Yeah.
That's almost unheard of in minor league
Yeah.
baseball. I mean, because everybody wants to change it so often because it's all about, merch sales, this or that, or you can do different things. I'm going to tell you that we haven't slowed down on this logo at all. I mean, we've changed coloring. It's, I mean, back in the days in 93 to 2006, it was very grayscale. But then in 2006, when we rolled out the one that you're wearing and I have on a sweatshirt that says 2020, what the shuck? I mean, that I sent this sweatshirt to 50 states.
Nice.
I mean, it was when it came out in 2020. And I know that it was partly about that, but it's just, I mean, you're right. I wear a sweatshirt, a Colonel sweatshirt anywhere. I was in Vegas at Christmas, and I don't know how many people gave me a shout out. As far as the community attachment, I've always believed that minor league baseball is sort of the lighthouse beacon, to every community that they're in. I mean, as after 2020 now, there's only 120 teams. So 120 cities are lucky enough nationwide to have minor league baseball all summer. I go to a few away games a year. I dream about trips like you were talking about. I want to retire at some time. I said, and go visit my friends, but then I realized that all my friends will also be retired. So I'll go visit somebody else at those ballparks to be able to do that. So, but it's that, just having minor league baseball in a community, they're very fortunate, and every one of them looks at it that way.
Absolutely. The name itself, Kernels, understanding that you were not there in 1993 when the name was unveiled, but can you speak to what that name means to that community, why a team in Cedar Rapids, Iowa would be called the Kernels?
I can. It's kind of a fun story. When I got here, I was equally obsessed with trying to figure out, how the voting went, because what they did was they put it out to a vote, community vote, like everybody submit names. And, Kernels was one that kind of surfaced. We have yet to ever given a thought to changing it again. I mean, it's never come up. We're fortunate that we got to tie it into our Copa brand now. We're actually called Granos, which is Kernel. We basically took one kernel flexing, as our Copa logo. Really cool to play off of that.
Yeah, and obviously, agriculture and corn, that's a huge part of life in Iowa. I would say that, part of this longevity that you're talking about with this team and with this nickname is this fantastic logo that you have. The decision to make the change, you were there for that in 2006 into the 2007 season. What went into the decision to change from, the sort of generic?
It was very grayscale, as I pointed out before. Everything was red, gray, white. It was really interesting. And Mr. Shucks, who's our beloved mascot and an absolute icon in the Midwest. He gets invited to all kinds of different mascot parties everywhere. Was really bland. And, we looked at it, we're like, come on, it's more fun than that. And if we're, looking at a logo change, it became evident we needed something. And you're going to, when you talk about the logo, what you're going to talk about is it's basically primary colors. Greens were yellows, were, red. It's absolutely perfect. There's so much you can do to play off of that. And rebranding was an absolute necessity at that point in time. And we've updated branding just signage wise and continued to use those same color scales probably every 3 to 4 years in the ballpark. Just keeping it looking new. It's hard to think that this ballpark's been here 24 years at this point in time. And I feel like she's new every day. I feel the same way about our logo. I just look at it, and when I'm designing new designs every year, it's just such fun ways to use that.
I'll say just in general, I think this logo and this brand, perhaps because it has been around for a long time, it was around before we really got into this era of wacky minor league baseball branding. I think it's a little underappreciated, right? I think it's one of the best out there, and I think that we don't talk about it enough when you talk about like the classic minor league baseball brands. It's a brand based on corn, and maybe that's sort of a punchline, right? Like it's like, oh, Iowa corn, that sort of thing. Is that a conversation that you all have? Like, when you talk about like what else could we be featuring, maybe in alternate brands? What could we be doing, that would highlight other things in Iowa here? Or is it like we're just doubling down on Iowa and corn?
Well, we don't want to double down on Iowa and corn, because so many of us that sit here in the second largest city in Iowa feel like there are cities in Iowa. We're surrounded by corn, but to be able to do that, we don't want to, give that impression all the time. But it's the first thing the players see when they come and land at the airport. It's, all of that kind of stuff. Playing on being one of the teams chosen with Quad Cities to play the only minor league game currently at Field of Dreams, it was a dream come true. Be able to talk about corn and be able to have been on that field and, and go back, to an old logo at that point in time. But unbelievable, the attachment that still has to it. Obviously, Iowa's an agricultural state, but there's so much more to it than that.
And when, the name Kernels obviously calls up this, sometimes sort of militaristic imagery. How much do you find yourself having to explain, especially with even the sort of the demeanor of the character in the logo has a sort of stern look on his face? Do you find yourself having to explain, no, we're talking about kernels of corn, not a colonel in the military?
No, what I normally have to explain is that we as a group talk about all the time. We're like, if we had $1 for every time we got an email with Kernel spelled wrong, or the times that people would say, I tried to send you an email, Scott at Kernels. I'm like, how'd you spell Kernels? They're like, oh, I'll resend that email to you.
So speaking of Cedar Rapids baseball, you mentioned the team before they were the Kernels, before you all were the Kernels. Lot of parent club names: Reds,
Mhm.
Giants, Astros, Cardinals, Indians, but some that were obviously unique nicknames, which is always fun to see, sort of especially in like late 1800s, early 1900s. The Canaries was a fun one.
Yeah.
The Rabbits, and then you mentioned the Field of Dreams game where you all got some national attention, and this was really a lot of fun. You got to play as one of these other names that you have had in the course of your history, the Cedar Rapids Bunnies, with these awesome uniforms. The Cedar Rapids Bunnies have this great visual brand. Getting that attention, reviving that old brand. What did that mean for the Kernels?
It's crazy the amount of people that love retro. And when we played that game, we now have had a bunnies night last year, this year, every year planning. We sell the jerseys off the players back. The players want to buy the jerseys first. I'm like, fine, go online and bid away because we're not selling it to you. I was like, these go for a nice little click. And I have the Jumpin' Bunny logo on a sweatshirt in the store and the Cedar Rapids Bunnies, logo on a t-shirt in the store, and we sell it nationwide. And it's that throwback piece. And you start thinking about it and you're like, and this is heritage from 1920s and 1930s, throwback to be able to do that. I look at it and laugh because I'm like, at some point, colleges seem to have mascots that they want to be intimidating. That didn't happen as the Canaries or the Rabbits or the Bunnies. Those weren't intimidating mascots. I mean, but then I'm like, that's not what baseball's been about. And it is fun to have Bunnies nights. It's fun to celebrate really that piece. And what we talk about when we talk about that is the longevity of baseball. I mean, at this point in time, we're talking about a Bunnies logo that's 100 plus years old.
Well, it was fun, as a minor league baseball fan, it was a lot of fun for me to see, teams that I knew getting some attention on a national scale, which doesn't always happen. Did that create at the time? Did that create an influx for you, a national? Did you find yourself shipping stuff all over the country that you might not have been otherwise?
Yeah, and I think I think we have a following kind of nationwide. That for sure did. Harold Reynolds talked very I mean, I just appreciate the kind comments about Cedar Rapids itself and the facility and piece. It was it's very appreciative. I listen to that game every once in a while on when I can get back to it, and just because it just spoke so highly of the area that we feel really passionate about too. Davenport and the Quad Cities team, they're good friends of ours, the same situation. And we were just thankful to be the teams to play there. It made sense. We're both from Iowa. We're both just over an hour away from that ballpark. And when you come on a baseball trip like yourself, obviously the Field of Dreams has got to be included in a stop by as well on that, because you don't get any more nostalgic baseball than that. I mean, that we show that movie at our ballpark probably every couple 3 years,
Mm.
and people just come out. I mean, it's just watching that game, watching that movie at a ballpark, sitting there doing that, and then being able to on a weekend, if you do it, head up there the next day and sit on those same bleachers and be able to do that was really neat. We got the amount of followers that it created and the things that happened after that, were really exciting.
Well, and so you're sort of dovetailing into the last question that I have for you, which is the logo landscape in minor league baseball is getting really wacky out there. And how do you maintain that national following? How do you build a following with a 17-year-old brand that
Mhm.
there's no reason to change because it's terrific?
Right.
How do you stand out in this landscape?
So, our social media manager would tell you that she's key on that, and
Uh-huh.
she is, to
Uh-huh.
be able to keep it relevant, at all times. The biggest thing that we do is fend off phone calls where they're like, "Hey, I've got this great idea that we could maybe change it to," and I feel like we're fending those off more than
Yeah.
anything nowadays, because
Yeah.
they're like, "Hey, look at all these terrific," and I love, like, I will get calls from the folks who sell us merchandise, and they'll be like, "Man, these guys are just killing it with this new brand." And I say, "I appreciate that, but I don't think that your logo and your brand is all about selling a T-shirt or doing things like that." And our players who come in, when we speak to them about it, they absolutely love it. And in our world, we're married to the Twins in an affiliation wise, so we're not. I mean, it's not a crazy logo out there, branding on the Twins. I still like Minnie and Paul when I was a kid growing up. I mean, that's just, those kind of things. So I was like, we're not attached to somebody who has a crazy logo, and we're real conservative, sort of Midwest, I think, on that. And so I think that's why that's never come up. And I think keeping yourself relevant in the social media world and keeping that logo on everything you do,
Yeah,
is the most important aspect.
yeah. So I lied. I said I had a last question for you, and I actually have one more because you prompted it with this. You mentioned you are part of the COPA program,
Yep.
but you don't see the Cedar Rapids kernels pop up a lot when, as it were, when we talk about alternate brands, temporary identities, the food-based things. I guess you're already kind of a food-based logo anyway. But that's, I'm sure, an organizational decision to say we're going to just focus on our one main brand here rather than muddying it up with alternate brands that are often completely separate from the primary identity.
Yeah, I think Copa is the one that we're in now. After we did the Field of Dreams game, Bunnies became our alternate
Mhm.
logo. That is one we ride pretty hard. We also have one more alternate, obviously being based in Iowa, next to where I grew up and wrestled at it. And you think about the University of Iowa, we're the Mac Rapplers. So we have that one other alternative logo. The toughest part about alternative logos is they cost a tremendous amount of money to research.
Mm.
And from our perspective, I'm a conservative guy that's like, okay, I have to make sure that, if we're investing into this, that at least breaks even. I mean, to be
Right.
able to do that. We love it. We have such a Czech heritage in the Cedar Rapids area. We look to try to be the Kolaches, and we talked
Mm.
about doing that. I mean, it's fantastic. Some of these things that you can do with these alternate names and identities. And we will get there more and more. But right now, we're trying to, like you said, not muddy the waters with 1 to 2.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and where we're at, we feel like we're really strong on Copa. We're really good on the bunnies, and to be able to do that. And we're proud of being able to pull off Copa, in the middle of the country where we sit. I mean, it's like there obviously makes sense in certain other parts of the country. We just don't have, that much. I mean, probably 4 to 5% of having a Latino nationality
Mm-hmm.
celebration in town. But there's a Latino Heritage Festival that we've been partnering with to be able to do that. Our our dugout's got 6 or 7 guys. I've got flags in my drawer that we wear during a national anthem where we represent every country down there, because
Very cool.
I just absolutely love how baseball is a melting pot of this. And it's like, it's so cool.
Well, I can't believe it's taken me this long to feature one of my favorite brands in minor league baseball because this one has been a long time favorite of mine. Where can people find you, Scott, or the team online on social media, etc.?
Perfect. Kernels.com. If you go to KRNELS.com, kernels.com will find you there. We have CR Kernels is TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. Our social media manager would love for people to jump on there and watch some of the fun stuff we do.
Well, I'm glad you spelled kernels for everyone. For God's sake, everyone, spell kernels right. KERNELS.com. Scott, this has been a ton of fun. Thank you so much. And look forward to getting back to Cedar Rapids for a game. And if it's cold, if it's rainy, I've got just the sweatshirt for it.
Perfect. Appreciate it. Thank you, Paul.
Have a good one, Scott. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. I am so happy to welcome back to the podcast my good friend, Dan Simon. We're going to talk about the Cedar Rapids Kernels, a team that was desperately in need of a rebrand when you came to the rescue in 2006 for the 2007 season. They just, they had a very generic brand. It looked like something that belonged to like the Chamber of Commerce or something. And you saved the day with this amazing corn character where the corn still in its husk is the shape of a baseball bat. So the corn has been replaced with a baseball bat. He's got a face and he's got a baseball cap on. And in one of the logos in particular, the husk forms the letter K. Again, we don't do Easter eggs here. That's just type as image, I guess, or image as type. So this is one of my favorite brands. I've said this a number of times. I have liked this brand for a long, long time. Green, yellow, red, sort of a classic color combination. I'm going to let you take it from here. You took over, you saved the day. There was a boring brand that needed to be scrapped, and you did that. What were your considerations? What were the challenges coming into this project?
Well, when you said it was, and I forget your exact words, to paraphrase, in dire need of a brand update or a rebrand, it's really a brand update as opposed to a rebrand. That identity, if anybody had asked me prior to doing that identity, what one minor league identity do you want to do? It would have been the Cedar Rapids Kernels, because there was such a huge missed opportunity there. Their existing logo had something similar going on. It was an ear of corn with the leaves at the top, kind of peeled open or shucked open, if you will, even if you won't. Um, and an ear of corn is a cylindrical object, and coming out of the top of this ear of corn
I see where you're going.
was a baseball, a round baseball. It didn't make any sense. A, with regard to shape, and B, with regard to color. Now, an ear of corn, now obviously there's like Indian corn and blue corn and
Sure.
other things like that, but the great majority of corn, and or stereotypically, of course, corn is yellow. Now, baseball bats in real life, ash and maple bats, unless they are, painted, their natural color is kind of a tan color, but oftentimes in logo form, those bats are yellow, like an ear of corn. So I just wanted to get my mitts on this identity, and it was one of those things where I didn't go looking for it. I didn't contact them. I was at the baseball winter meetings. This was back in the day when I used to have a booth at the trade show there, which was great. It was like one-stop shopping. I was there, and every single team is walking through the trade show floor. And at the time, I was the only designer with a booth at the trade show. So it was just great. And somebody from the Kernels front office came up to me and said, "Hey, we're interested in a brand update." And I was thrilled to pieces. People have asked me many, many times what my favorite brand identity is that I've done. And now, in the same way that if somebody asks who's your favorite child, it's not a good idea, even if you have one, to say who it is. I have two children. Neither one's my favorite. I love them both, and in different ways and for different reasons. And I can say the same thing about virtually all the brand identities I've done. But I will point out the Kernels as an identity that I feel is better than it is with regard to people talking about it. There's other identities I've done, like the Savannah Bananas and the Toledo Mud Hens, where they get talked about a lot. You've mentioned the Daytona Tortugas.
Love that.
Nobody brings up the Cedar Rapids Kernels. I think part of that also has to do with the fact that, no disrespect to Cedar Rapids, but it's a small market. It's a lower level team, Class A team. I don't remember. They were low A. I don't know if they're high A now with the restructuring, but it's still definitely a single A team. And most people have not been to Cedar Rapids. It didn't have the exposure of something like the Toledo Mud Hens that had the benefit of Corporal Klinger making it famous on MASH, or Bull Durham from the movie, of the Durham Bulls from the movie Bull Durham. So I look back on some of the logos I did years ago, and there are definitely, if not things about them that I would want a complete do-over, there were certain things I would change, maybe do a little better, or maybe do a little differently. With this one, I wouldn't change a single thing. If I did this logo today, this is how I would do it, and I'd be very proud of the way it came out. I don't understand why this identity doesn't get more love, except maybe people just don't get that excited about corn. It's not a penguin or a turtle. So
Well, so let's chat about that. I mean, that's, I think, an interesting part of this design is you had to take a admittedly not so exciting thing, right? Like, and we talked on the previous segment, Cedar Rapids has a lot of stuff going on as a town, and they chose almost ironically, but not really ironically, because it's so important to that part of the country, to base their logo on corn, which is a little bit of a punchline almost about the Midwest, right? Like you think of Iowa, you think of corn. And this agriculture is an important part of our national infrastructure, right? And it is very much identified with the Midwest. But as you say, it is not exciting. And so your task as a designer was to take something that is associated with sort of big, wide open fields and make it fun and interesting and visually pleasing. And this logo accomplishes that. So how do you set about that with this character? He's not grimacing. He's not throwing a ball with his cornhusk arms. He's smirking. I see you looking at the logo now. He's smirking. He's not grimacing. And he doesn't have big wide eyes. He's not being demonstrative in any way, right? Like he's kind of, I would describe this character as stoic. And he's got sort of like an old farmer's cap. I mean, it looks like a baseball cap, but it's also the sort of like you could see a farmer in Iowa wearing a hat like this with sort of the high top and the big brim. So I'm curious about the decisions that you made with this logo and with this character, in consideration of the fact that, yeah, it's not the most exciting subject matter in the world.
Obviously, a lot of thought goes into an identity I develop and all the elements of it, but I can't say there was anything specific except trying to take this ear of corn, which is otherwise, a very inanimate object, and bring it to life. And I felt I did that with, you mentioned that the leaves of the ear of corn, make the letter K. And so the character became animated that way. It's not really his arms and legs, but it sort of is. And it's like he's gesturing, and that gesture's making the letter K.
Mhm.
So this thing, I guess maybe what I was doing was I was bringing an ear of corn to life. Although
Well,
there is also a version of him in the primary logo where the leaves do not make the letter K. It's a
right.
little more straight up because there is the type over it. The kernel's type is over it.
That exists also as a standalone, as it were, where you've got the corn husks symmetrical. They're just sort of peeling away. Maybe that's an I for Iowa.
Hey, look at that. It's almost as if I did that on purpose.
I'll tell you, this character. So I mean, he does have this sort of two stances there. It's a little reminiscent of a project that you would do some 17 years later, featuring a penguin, where the penguin is standing there in a sort of refined way, not gesticulating wildly. Obviously talking about the Rome emperors here. You've got the pontificating penguin with his one flipper fin, something in the air. And then
Yeah.
you have him standing there with a baseball bat over his shoulder. I think that this corn cob character, a couple of decades earlier, is kind of similar. Standing there, not throwing a ball, not gesticulating wildly, just sort of in a more refined, sort of serious pose. And I think it works. It works for the emperors, and it works for these kernels here. I also really like this type, because the type to me sort of feels corn husky to me, right? Like you didn't do kernels of corn. You sort of evoked, in my mind, it evokes the husk rather than the corn itself in the type. Was that something that was in your mind when you were creating this type, or is it more creating a baseball script?
Kind of a combination of both,
Yeah.
because I've done a lot of baseball scripts. I've got a couple of new identities that will be coming out shortly that have scripts in it. I love scripts. They're great for baseball identities. With this one, I had the initial idea was to do this ear of corn with his leaves making the letter K. And ideally what I wanted to do was have that K with the ear of corn in it be the K in the kernel's lettering. Whereas for a lot of other identities, I've done that maybe another time or two. I know the Idaho Falls Chuckers, the bird character is in the C. of their script. And off the top of my head, I can't think of another one. I know that there's in the Toledo Mud Hens road lettering, which says Toledo, the character is over the letter T. So there the characters integrated as well. But I definitely wanted to get the K with the character in it integrated into the script. So that K had already been developed and it had a certain look to it, which includes like the lines on the leaves. And so the script then needed to work in concert with that. So if to you, you feel that the rest of those letters feel like the husk of the ear of corn, it's because it was meant, everything was meant to work together. So if it looks that way to you, I guess it means that I successfully integrated the script with the letter K or vice versa.
Well, it does feel that way to me. And there are two versions of that script. One where, you've got the ear of corn as K, and then one where you just have in the primary logo, you've got the K that is, part of that letter set that you designed, the custom font that you created. One of these days, Dan, we can go really in depth about the difference between a font and a typeface.
I don't think we don't have to go in depth. We can settle that right now. They're the same thing. It's just
These days they are.
okay. Well, maybe there's more to it, and we'll tackle that some other day, I suppose.
We can also talk about where the terms uppercase and lowercase come from. We can have a whole typographic nerding out episode. Maybe that'll be next Christmas.
Okay, or that might be not that I don't want to do it, but that sounds like a Todd Radom episode.
Maybe that'll be a Todd Radom thing. Yeah, because we've already established on this podcast that we disagree on whether kerning and letter spacing are the same thing. So maybe we could just have a point counterpoint. We can have Todd mediate.
Yeah, maybe it is kind of like a panel thing.
Yeah. That actually, I love the idea of having like all the designers on one day, just having you and Sky Dillon and Ryan Foose and Jason Klein and just doing a whole like designer roundtable episode.
Can you imagine though? I don't know how much of a crowd it would draw, but it'd be great to do instead of an episode, do it, live at some event space. And that'd be a lot of fun. I'd love to get up there with all the others that do that. I've met a number of these professionals, some of whom are close friends of mine, but we've never all been together in one room. That would be something.
All right. That is the Baseball by Design convention is going to happen someday. And we'll have a keynote panel discussion with all the designers who we feature on the podcast. That would be a lot of fun.
Right.
Dan, we're going to talk to you later on in this episode for your Studio Simon Stumper. In the meantime, thank you so much for coming on and talking about this logo from 17 years ago. Again, one of my favorites. I'm so glad to finally feature it on the podcast. We'll talk to you in about 10 minutes here for the Studio Simon Stumper.
Well, thank you as always, or thank you again for having me. And thank you for bringing this under the radar logo the attention I feel it so richly deserves.
Well, this podcast has actually cost me a lot of money. And I think now I may have to augment my sweatshirt. I may have to go buy a cap with this Kernels logo on it because it's one that I should have in the collection. Dan, we'll see you in a couple of minutes.
Okay, see you then. Bye.
All right, everyone, welcome back. I am so pleased to have on Baseball by Design my friend Heather Huke, who is the Conservation Education Manager for Cerro Gordo County Conservation. Heather, good morning. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Paul. How are you?
I am doing really, really well. So glad to be talking to you. We go way, way back. In fact, we have been in Iowa together. We went caving like several hundred feet underground, maybe like 100 feet underground. And we had to go down this like lost style hatch into the ground. Now we're talking about above ground Iowa. We're talking about corn. And so I appreciate you coming on as a conservationist and a naturalist, someone who cares about the place of Iowa. I'm going to just put this question out to you. What role does corn play in the state of Iowa?
it's the forefront of Iowa. When you say Iowa, as long as you're not confused with Idaho or Ohio, you think about corn. I have a very vivid memory in my mind of actually being out in the Badlands and interacting with a couple from Ohio who had verbalized that they drove through Iowa to get to vacation and were just absolutely gobsmacked about what Iowa looked like.
First of all, gobsmacked is a great word. um, I grew up on the East Coast and had not seen that like expanse of corn before until I paid a visit to University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and that surrounding area was very similar, very sort of agricultural in nature. I've been to Iowa as part of my baseball palooza road trips. In fact, I have been to a Cedar Rapids Kernels baseball game. That's obviously the team that we're talking about on this episode. And so Cedar Rapids is a cool city, right? Like it has a lot going on, and
It does.
Iowa at large has a lot going on. You are your area of focus with your profession is on the sort of natural world. How does this sort of the world of agriculture, the world of corn interact with the endemic species and the natural world in Iowa?
Well, it's a heavy player in the history of Iowa, and it takes a lead role in our ongoing story. The reason why we are so synonymous with corn is our land was built for corn. Corn is a different type of grass, and since Iowa historically was tall grass prairie, the soils were designed to allow grass to thrive. So it makes sense that we are the perfect place to be the Corn Belt, because that's what Iowa was made for, was for growing grass. Now, not maybe all grass. We do produce a lot of it. We rank number one in two things. Iowa ranks number one in corn production in the country, and we also rank number one for being the most biologically altered state in the nation. Those two go hand in hand.
That's really interesting, right? Because that's sort of what I was getting at with this question of, is it like corn versus nature, or is there a way to synthesize the two? Do they exist sort of in the same space?
They used to exist in the same space in the early farming practices, but as industry grows, as technology grows, things change. So the story of corn in Iowa has kind of had this ebb and flow. There was a connection to nature, a harmony with nature when farming practices were much smaller, and then big industry changed the face of Iowa. And now we are starting to work in collaboration with agriculture and conservation to figure out how to get a peaceful connection.
So as a person who loves the state of Iowa, as you do, when you hear that association, that automatic sort of knee-jerk association of Iowa equals corn, do you have a negative reaction to that because there's more going on in Iowa than that? Or do you figure, well, okay, it's fair?
That's an interesting question. I used to get really frustrated at it, and now as I have progressed in my professional life, I almost see it as a challenge when I interact with people that instinctively connect corn and farming to Iowa. I have pride in it, knowing that our products are not just for Iowa or for the United States, as Iowa touches the world with our industries, with our agriculture. And that means a lot, that we are providing not just for ourselves, we are giving to the world. But I take it as I said, I take it as a challenge, because that just means they haven't been given the opportunity to see real Iowa.
So real Iowa, that you're suggesting there that there are other things that this team might have been named for, right? There are other things going on in Iowa that could have been celebrated. The team chose to sort of double down on the whole notion of Iowa equals corn with their admittedly awesome logo. Like, I love the logo.
It is a fun logo.
Yeah.
I agree.
But the decision to double down on corn for the identity of a baseball team. And there are other baseball teams in Iowa, like in Davenport, you've got the Quad Cities River Bandits, and they've got their fun sort of raccoon logo, and they've got a sort of historical bent to their team. So there are other things that they could have done with this team. Do you have any suggestions, any thoughts for, what could a baseball team celebrate about Iowa with a nickname or a logo?
That's a really hard question. I
I sprung that one on you. I'm sorry.
I don't want to come down negatively on the
Mm.
Kernels, because when we brought interpreters to Iowa from across the country, when we designed our logo, we put corn on the logo because corn has been on our land for 1,000 years. Just it didn't look the same as it does today. So I like to think the Kernels are yes, doubling down, but they're celebrating history, they're celebrating connectivity between cultures, they're celebrating industry, they're celebrating all those things. I think it would be cool if the Kernels would alter the color of their kernels
Ah,
to kind of give homage to where corn came from.
interesting. Right. And Dan Simon, who designed the logo, actually talked about this in the previous segment. There are other colors of corn, right? Like there's the blue corn and there's red corn. Now, this brings me to my last question for you, which is, are there characteristics of corn, things about corn that would make it a good baseball player?
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, they demand respect with their height and stature. Corn is not easily missed, and we've gotten really good at growing it tall. So if you want a teammate to command the attention of the audience and the other team,
Yeah.
that corn demands that respect. And it's resilient with the ever-changing world. Man, corn's still growing strong. So I would say corn would make a great baseball player, just because of how it commands its space, and also how it's tough.
That is a spectacular assessment of corn as baseball. Heather, this has been fun. Thank you so much. Where can people find Cerro Gordo County Conservation and or you on social media, online, that sort of thing?
Well, absolutely. You can check us out on our website for sure. We are a government agency, so you might have to do a few clicks to find us. Facebook, of course, the easiest way to find us is through our nature center. Actually, Lime Creek Nature Center is where all of our education and fun connectivities happen. So check us out at Lime Creek Nature Center.
Awesome. And that'll be in the show notes. Heather, it was so much fun to catch up with you. Thank you for doing this.
You are so welcome, Paul.
All right, everyone, it is time for your favorite, my favorite segment on the Baseball by Design podcast studio. Simon Stumpers. Dan Simon, welcome back. It's been a long time. How are you?
Oh, I am as well as I was, as fantastic as I was when you asked me that just minutes ago.
We're still talking about the Cedar Rapids Kernels, and now we've got a stumper that will be tangentially related to corn, Iowa, anthropomorphic vegetables. Let's see where we're going.
Okay, well, here's where we're going. Okay, in addition to Kernels, Cedar Rapids teams have had numerous names over the years since professional baseball was first played there in 1890, goes all the way back to 1890. They've had, amongst those numerous names, they've had 6 major league affiliate names, but they've also had just about as many unique names. So our studio Simon Stumper today asks, for the 2022 minor league Field of Dreams game against the Quad City River Bandits, who played as the Davenport Blue Sox, what was the former Cedar Rapids team name by which the Kernels played? Was it A, the Cedar Rapids Kickers, B, the Cedar Rapids Bunnies, or C, the Cedar Rapids Canaries?
Dan, every once in a while, you ask me a question that I actually know the answer to and do not have to suss. This is one. I was a huge fan of this brand when they trotted it out there. I don't know if they trot. if when they hopped it out there,
Hopped it out there.
in 2022 for the game at the Field of Dreams. The answer obviously is bunnies. This is one I knew before we started recording this segment. It's actually one that I knew before we started recording the previous segment, and we did discuss it a little bit on the previous segment. So I'm guessing listeners who have been paying attention will also have gotten this one. I'm told that people will play along with Studio Simon Stumpers, and I'm guessing anyone who was paying attention to the episode previously, we chatted about this a little bit. So I will say B, bunnies, final answer.
You are correct, sir. So all of those names were legitimate names of the Cedar Rapids, of a Cedar Rapids team from the past. The kickers were charter members of the Illinois-Iowa League in 1890, so that was the original team. What they were kicking, I don't know, but they were renamed the Canaries for the 1891 season. The Bunnies played in the Western Association from 1896 before disbanding midway through the 1898 season, but they were revived as a charter member, or that name was revived, I should say, as a charter member of the Class D Mississippi Valley League, where they played from 1922 to 1932.
Yeah.
But with professional baseball going back well over 100 years, you can imagine they had not only a number of players that played in Cedar Rapids, but also players that, if they weren't notable necessarily for their whole career, there were players who did some notable things in the major league. So let's visit some of them. You had from the 1913 Cedar Rapids Bunnies, you had a player named Bill Wamsgans. Now, Bill was notable for two things. One was his last name ended in two S's for no apparent reason. He was, but probably almost as notable as that was he was a second baseman for the Cleveland Indians, and in Game 5 of the 1920 World Series, he completed the only unassisted triple play in World Series history.
I actually have a funny story about Bill Wamsgans, and if you are watching the TV show Succession and don't want a spoiler, skip ahead like a minute right now, because you're about to get a spoiler for the TV show Succession. Bill Wamsgans is the name with one S of a character in the TV show Succession. Did you watch Succession? Do you know what I'm about to say, Dan?
I do not.
So he was a character in Succession who pulled off at the end of the show a kind of triple play where he knocked off the three sort of main characters who were all expected to assume the helm of this big company that was the focal point of this TV show. And the conspiracy theory was that the authors or the writers of this show knew all along that Bill Wamsgans was going to be the one to finally succeed to power here, because he pulled off this triple play in very much the same way the character Bill Wamsgans in the World Series.
Well, there's no way that's a coincidence. Then if there is, that is the darndest thing. But that sounds like a baseball fan who worked that in. And similarly, now I didn't watch this show, but it was a big hit when it was on. Maybe you watched it. Did you watch the X-Files?
A little bit. I was not like a big X-Files fan.
Well, hopefully you can help me here. His name is escaping me. Gillian Anderson was the lead woman on the show, and the lead man,
David Duchovny, played Fox Mulder.
Duchovny. Well, then who was Agent Scully?
Gillian Anderson.
Okay. Now that's not a coincidence. That's because the producer of the show, or the head writer, or whoever it was, big baseball fan, big Dodger fan. It's named after Vin Scully. And then when Scully left, the person that replaced him was Agent Doggett, which was also a Dodger announcer. So a Los Angeles Dodgers radio and TV announcer. So it's another case of Hollywood bringing their baseball fandom into their naming of their characters. I've got a few more. Do we have time to go through some of these?
Yeah.
Okay. All of these players played for Cedar Rapids and did some pretty notable things. Tony Cloninger, who played for the 1959 Cedar Rapids Braves, is the only pitcher in Major League history to hit 2 grand slams in the same game.
Wow.
Then you've got from the 1960 Cedar Rapids Braves, the very next season, Tommy Aaron. Some people might have heard of his brother, Hank. The two of them together hold the record for most career home runs by brothers.
Is it 755?
Well, 768 total. Henry had 755. As you just mentioned, Tommy had 13.
Okay, well, it's better than I thought it was going to be, actually.
Well, it's better than the Canseco brothers. Jose and Ozzie hold the record for most home runs by twins.
Oh, right.
And all of those home runs, Ozzie did play in the majors, but never hit a home run.
Yeah.
So all of those came off the bats of Jose.
Yeah.
Okay, now you also have from a teammate of Tommy's on the 1960 Cedar Rapids Braves, he also played for them in 1961, is a gentleman named Ron Hunt, who holds the modern era record for most hit by pitches in a season, having been plunked 50 times in 1971 while playing for the Montreal Expos, smack dab in the middle of leading the league in taking one for the team 7 straight seasons. So
wow. He's the Chase Utley of Cedar Rapids.
Yep. Then the 1965 Cedar Rapids Kernels, Nate Colbert, always one of my favorite players. To this day, he still holds the records for most home runs in San Diego Padre history. And then you have from the 1966 Cedar Rapids Kernels, a very colorful character, Pedro Borbon. Pedro Borbon is most known as a relief pitcher for the Cincinnati Reds during their Big Red Machine days. But he was also known for something he did with his teeth. In a 1974 bench clearing brawl, he bit Pittsburgh Pirates relief pitcher Darrell Patterson, resulting in a wound that required a tetanus shot. And after the game, when Patterson was asked by reporters who inflicted said wound, Patterson said, "Pedro Borbon did it. He fights like a woman." So, but that was not the only time he used his teeth in a brawl. In another bench clearing brawl, this time against the New York Mets, he lost his hat somewhere during the brawl, and in their resulting kerfuffle, he picked up a hat, put it on its head, and at some point, took it off and looked at it and realized it was a New York Mets hat, which infuriated him so much that he took a bite out of that New York Mets hat and it threw it to the ground. So that's got to be the most colorful player in Cedar Rapids Kernels history.
I have another pop culture association with a player you've brought up here, Pedro Borbon. My association, when I hear that name, I think of the movie Airplane. At one point, they're making announcements at the airport. I forget the exact situation, but the PA announcement is just sort of going crazy at the actual airport. And it's, the white zone is for this, the blue zone for this, and this is, unloading here and passenger pickup here. And, I'm getting all of that wrong. But what I do remember is the line when just sort of randomly they say pinch hitting for Pedro Borbon, Medi Mota. And so I associate Pedro Borbon with the movie Airplane.
Oh, that is so funny. That's great. We should end on that, but I want to give 3 more players there.
Okay.
So the 1970 Cedar Rapids Kernels, there was a pitcher named Bob Forsch, who, along with his brother Ken, whose last name was also Forsch, are the only brothers in Major League history to throw no-hitters.
Wow.
And then finally, we have 2 more current players, not just more current players, actual current players. Mike Trout played for the 2009 and 2010 Cedar Rapids Kernels. Of course, we know him as one of the greatest players of this generation, three-time MVP, Rookie of the Year, and then we will end with Joe Mauer, who played for the 2014 Kernels. And let's congratulate Mr. Mauer, who was just recently announced as first ballot Baseball Hall of Famer.
You probably have had so many important players in the game of baseball wear designs that you've created. Does it get old to you ever to know that Mike Trout and Joe Mauer were wearing logos and designs that you created?
Never gets old. I love one of the great things about social media, despite all of its ills, there are some pretty great things about it. The recent players who just got into the Hall of Fame, in addition to Joe Mauer, Adrian Beltre, and help me here,
Todd Helton.
Todd Helton, thank you. All three deserving in my estimation. And one of the posts I saw on social media was of these three players during their minor league days. And in addition to playing for the Cedar Rapids Kernels, Joe Mauer also played for the Fort Myers Miracle, but it may have been as a rehab assignment. So, but he definitely played from, whether it was on his rise to the majors or rehab, I don't remember, but love seeing it every time. And as a matter of fact, I have in my files a photo of Mike Trout in his Cedar Rapids Kernels uniform. I would argue that that's my favorite photo of a player wearing a uniform I designed. Maybe it's because that I just still love that uniform. And come on, it's Mike Trout. So
well, and that answer makes me happy, just because it makes me know that you're still a fan at heart, and you have this joy of the game and seeing the great players, and especially wearing your creations, which I can only imagine would be amazing to see.
The little kid in me has never left. Sir, I am a fan, but not, and I will always be a fan. And I have to conduct myself professionally when in those times I've been around ball players, but I'm still excited like a little boy inside.
Awesome. Yeah. Dan, I love it. Thank you so much. We will see you in 1 week for Studio Simon Stumpers. This has been a fun day of conversation about the Cedar Rapids Kernels. We'll see you in a week.
See ya.